Hi, everybody!
Look, it's still early in development, but there's one bold statement that'll be as true as it is right now, right up until the post-launch period. Dead or Alive 7 has to be a success, or it's light out for the series. Let's explore why, but hit the subscribe button if you like deep dives into fighting games and JRPGs. While I still believe SoulCalibur will come back someday, for all intents and purposes, that franchise is deader than the dinosaurs. SoulCalibur 6 very well could be viewed as that franchise's swan song, because just like Dead or Alive 6 flopped, so too did SoulCalibur 5. SoulCal 6 was the last roll of the dice in hopes the franchise would do numbers again. Ultimately, the sixth entry didn't shit itself like SoulCalibur 5 did, but it also didn't light the world on fire like Bandai Namco hoped it would do. So the franchise has been put on ice yet again. I bet some of you are wondering why I'm talking about SoulCalibur 6 in a Dead or Alive 7 video. It's for the simple fact Dead or Alive 7 very much finds itself in the same situation SoulCalibur 6 found itself in. A fanbase that universally hated the previous entry, and after years of dormancy, suddenly the franchise is back in the spotlight. There are some differences though. For example, there was no definitive edition of SoulCal 5 between times. Dead or Alive 7 will be preceded by DOA 6 Last Round. That shows Koei Techmo has at least a bit more faith in the franchise than Bandai Namco did with SoulCalibur, so the chances of DOA 7 being a lame duck game are far lower, but it's still on shaky footing. However, unlike SoulCal, Dead or Alive doesn't need to be a home run. It just has to take a leaf out of the Moneyball Athletics book and get on base to be a success. Let's explore that analogy a bit further. For those of you who haven't read the 2003 book by Michael Lewis or seen the 2011 film starring Brad Pitt, let me summarize this for you. The 2002 Oakland Athletics faced a problem all small market teams eventually face when they get good, so to speak. That problem is the fact they just can't afford their own players, nor can they compete with the big boys when it comes to budgets. So instead of doing that, Billy Bean and the rest of the front office looked for alternative ways to win, and using analytics, found they had a higher chance of winning by simply getting more men to the plate than the other team. Whether it be a hit or a walk, it did not matter. Dead or Alive isn't a franchise that scrapes the bottom of the barrel trying to find cast-offs and spare parts from other franchises, though. It has its own identity. What I'm driving at is this. The game just has to get on base, akin to hitting a bleeder into the middle outfield, or working a walk. The game just needs to be fun and competent. To do that, it'll have to appeal to the core audience instead of trying to chase the esports scene like it tried with Dead or Alive 6. This is where my Oakland A's reference comes back into play. Dead or Alive would be the fighting game equivalent of a mid-market team, has a bit more budget to play with than a small market one does, but still not in the same stratosphere as one of the big boys, meaning it can afford to swing and miss a bit more. But that can only last for so long. Now we have to explore how we got here. So next up, we have to discuss how Dead or Alive 6 absolutely screwed the pooch. When that game released in 2019, it was coming off the absolute home run hit that was Dead or Alive 5, which was beloved by fans of the series and was my personal entry point into the FGC. However, Dead or Alive 6 was initially just meant to be an iterative entry to act as a stopgap between 5 and 7. However, confused marketing, toning down the unique selling point of the franchise, and hostile microtransactions turned a lot of series veterans off the 6th entry and caused a lot of newcomers to just consider other options. While Dead or Alive 6 does have its fans who will defend it dogmatically, I'm not one of them. If that had been my first experience with the series, I would have absolutely just said fuck this and moved on to other games. But long story short, Dead or Alive 6 pissed off a lot of people and ruined the reputation of this series, because veterans hated it and newcomers were probably hesitant to try it out because the franchise had a reputation for being what the kids would call gooner slop with its previous entries. Couple that with mediocre netcode and being so shallow in terms of game modes, calling it a puddle would be a compliment. It's really not surprising support for Dead or Alive 6 ended after just 1 year. But I don't want this video to be all doom and gloom. So let's look at how Dead or Alive 7 could end up being maybe something more than a broken bat single. Well, I sort of covered this in my wishlist video for Dead or Alive 7, I feel like we have to discuss exactly how Dead or Alive 7 could be a success. If I didn't mention something you feel would make it a successful game, then please do let me know in the comments. These are just some of the things I think would get it there. First up, I think it pretty much needs to include the things that are standardized for fighting games at this point in time, so something akin to Arcade Quest and Tekken 8, good rollback netcode, all of the standard modes like Survival, Time Attack, Arcade, etc. But it also needs a very good story mode, instead of what Team Ninja have brought to the table with the most recent Dead or Alive stories. They're passable if you're a longtime fan and kind of understand the lore, but as a whole, they are far from acceptable, even for the time. To be honest, part of me wonders if they might just be better served treating this game as a full-blown reboot and possibly retelling the story of Dead or Alive 1, but in a competent manner. Either way, a cinematic story that actually makes sense is a must. On top of that, I feel like a goodwill gesture from Koei Techmo to longtime fans would be a good idea. Maybe if you have some DLC from DOA 6 or Dead or Alive 6 Last Round, have it carry over. Or maybe launch the game below the usual retail price, even if it's not a significant decrease. A launch price of around 60 instead of the usual 80 would go a long way to smoothing things over, and it might encourage more sales long term. It also needs to have core fighters as an option from day fucking one, as that is the literal best way for anyone to try out a fighting game, as it means they have no risk in trying it out, and if they dislike it, then they only wasted space on their SSDs for a couple of hours. So what is my overall outlook on Dead or Alive 7? I'm cautiously optimistic. Even though things aren't being handled perfectly with DOA 6 Last Round, it at least looks like Team Ninja learned from their past transgressions, and are actively trying to deliver a decent product to the players. Also, from the brief teaser we got during the State of Play, it seems like they fully understand this next entry has to do well, or it might mean the death of the franchise. It's clearly leaning into what Dead or Alive's fandom enjoys, and while it's not final footage, it does look nice. Am I expecting it to look like that cinematic? No. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they got pretty damn close, considering how good the most recent Ninja Gaiden game looks. But what are your expectations for Dead or Alive 7, and do you think this is the last chance for the franchise? Sound off in the comments, and maybe check out my Dead or Alive 7 wishlist next. But until next time, keep blazing that trail.